Hey there. What are you doing here in the middle of the day? Is it nap time? Do you need a story for nap time? Sounds like it's time for another adventure with bedtime stories with Sean Arthur Cox, or as we like to call it here, BS with S.A.C. When last we left off, we were reading New Tricks, and we just finished the first chapter. We had William running through the wastelands, trying to get someplace, trying to get to the Laughing Raven, which, as it turns out, is Ollivander's bar. Ollivander is a great and legendary hero who now has retired and runs a bar. We see that he is helping people out, giving away free food, offering free heroic advice, and, telling people who were trying to take advantage of him, such as this peacock guy who was trying to get the Ollivander to steal a legendary treasure for an annoying noble called the Duke of Pembroke, kicking out people like him, helping out people like Arthur Tisdale, who needed a chosen one, and he helped him find the chosen one. Anyway, it's about where the chapter ends. And that brings us up to chapter 2, William. William ran. Responsibility, he realized. Things would have been so very different if he'd shown a little more responsibility. His thin legs cast wide arcs, propelling him forward at speeds he had previously thought himself incapable of. Fear was funny that way. If he'd been more responsible in the first place, he never would have caught their attention. He would be at the farmhouse with his family, never knowing, never suspecting. As far away as he was, as long as he'd been running, he could still smell the smoke. Its acrid, guilt-laden stench followed him down the dirt path through the woods like wolves stalking their prey. A little more responsibility later, and maybe he wouldn't be running. Or at least not running alone. Had he been a little more responsible later, he would have gone straight home to warn his family, instead of hiding out in the woods, hoping they didn't come for him, hoping no one ever found out. By the time he thought to warn his family, it was too late. The pillar of smoke from the barn already stretched into the sky, and he could see them, skulking through the fields. There was nothing left to do but run. His eyes burned through the salty tears and soot that lingered. His muscles burned from his ceaseless sprint, aching and screaming at him for being pushed beyond their endurance. His legs burned, but he couldn't stop. Not as long as the rage continued to burn in his fists, and shame continued to burn in his heart. Not as long as the fires continued to burn in his home several miles behind him. He had to make it to Barrow's End. He had to be responsible. Maybe then he could stop running, stop the burning. Maybe. The maid road between the Overhill family farm and Barrow's End was well-worn and mostly level. The dirt had long since been packed down hard, providing an easy surface for wagons and carriages to navigate. It was free from weeds, debris, and low-hanging branches. It was, quite simply, ideal for travel to and from. It was, quite simply, ideal for travel to and from town. Anybody looking for a hypothetical someone running from his burning homestead to town to warn other villagers would almost certainly look for such a theoretical survivor on just such a main road. William's decision to use his own private path, then, seemed the only logical and sensible option. His thin frame flew nimbly between the roots and branches of the hidden path. It was not the main road by any stretch of the imagination. Trees and weeds grew wild amid the dense underbrush and even uneven ground. Thorns and briars sliced at anyone unfamiliar with the path's twists and turns, and half-buried logs threatened to grab at the legs of unwary travelers. Not that the path had any unwary travelers. Only William and a select few others knew of its existence, and as such it never endured the foot traffic necessary to clearly mark its route. A stranger lost in these woods might not even notice the trail at all unless he'd had decent amount of experience tracking and hunting. He could only hope that they didn't have any such experience. He'd blazed the trail in his youth when his parents would send him on errands to town for food, supplies, and other simple items. His path did not need to accommodate carriages or horses, and thus did not cut around the hill or meander its way to the bridge over the brook. He could make the trip in half the time, allowing him to take a leisurely swim at the shady bend in the stream and still arrive home in time for supper without difficulty. His parents had never been the wiser. Now it seemed his youthful mischief would not only save his life, but perhaps every life in Barrow's End. Maybe there was something to be said for irresponsibility after all. Without the path, he would never make it to the village before they caught him. Had he not been chasing rabbits in the forest instead of tending to the livestock, he would never have stumbled across the encampment. He would never be able to warn Barrow's End of the enemy waiting just to the north. He would never have accidentally alerted them, would never have led them back to his home where they... Best not to think about it, he thought to himself. It's best to keep running. His footfalls came fast as the familiar woods whizzed by him. He darted left around the bush where he'd first kissed Sarah Miller 2 summers past, when she asked him to prove his love to her. Jumped over the log where he'd hidden that pouch of copper pieces he found on the highway. He ducked under a low branch that had no specific memory attached to it, other than being the low branch he always needed to remember to duck under after coming out of a hard curve in the path. His body easily avoided the roots. He knew the path well, and his confident feet led him quickly onward as instinct took over. The stream lay ahead, he knew, not far. Not much time to build up more speed. It was at least 20 feet across and fairly deep in the middle, deep enough at least for a 15-year-old to swim in. He wouldn't have time to wade across, let alone safely navigate the steep embankment. If he wanted to clear the creek quickly, he would need to dive for the old rope swing, and hope he had had enough momentum to carry him across. Could he make it? He'd never tried it before. If he missed, he could lose more time recovering than he would spend swimming across. Should he even... Too late now, he realized. He ran too far, too fast to stop himself before reaching the earthen ledge by the creek's east bank. Wait for it, he told himself. Mustn't jump too soon. His legs screamed, unable to move any faster, struggling to keep footing as the path filled with sand. Nearer and nearer the embankment drew, only a breath away. Wait for it. His legs bent low, then shot straight out beneath him, and his body lunged forward through the open air across the watery hazard below him. He swung his arms wildly for the rope that he'd tied long ago to the old oak tree, but missed. Instead, the rope slapped hard against his chest, the stinging pain startling him for a moment. Snapping back to his senses, William barely managed to grab hold in time before it slipped past him entirely. The tree groaned under his weight as the rope swing took over his dive. A sudden, violent jolt rocked his body as it abruptly shifted his movement into an upward arc, almost costing him his shaky grip. Fear alone kept his muscles clenched tightly enough to maintain his hold. Too tightly. He meant to let go a split second earlier, but the fear made him hesitate a fraction of an instant too long. He was losing momentum, and worse, the urgent let go message to his brain had sent was finally arriving at his hands. He'd hoped to swing back and make the leap on his next pass, but it was too late. The rope burned his palms as his fingers let go, sending him flying uncontrollably outward. The angle was all wrong. He wasn't going fast enough, wasn't going far enough. He braced himself for impact as his body plummeted just short of the western ledge. His outstretched arms reached for something to slow his descent, to break the blow. A vine, a tree, a branch, anything. But his hands met no success. His chest met the ridge of the embankment, and the breath he'd held so anxiously gushed from his lungs. Slipping down the sandy slope, William's flailing arms found a small tree and clung tightly to its trunk, hoping to keep from falling further. He tried to inhale, but couldn't. His lungs were still too stunned by the blow they had just taken. Without breath, he forced his arms to pull his tired young frame up the embankment. Halfway up, his throat cleared and he inhaled deeply, desperately seeking the clean air he'd been too long deprived of. In the cloud of dirt and dust his efforts had kicked up, however, he found none. His lungs filled with sand, choking him and drying his already parched mouth. The dirt in the air stuck to his sweat-drenched skin, making him look more like a mud golem than a 15-year-old farm boy. He cast his glance downward. The stream drifted into view and teased him, its cold, clear waters waving hypnotically to him. He could let go and let gravity pull him downward to its sandy bank. He'd be revitalized in moments, cold and refreshed on his balmy summer day. He could drink its waters. Surely he would be able to proceed much faster if he could only cool off and have something to wet his parched throat. No, he scolded himself aloud, voice dry and raspy. We don't have time. He grunted as he forced his arms to resume the difficult task of pulling himself back up the path. Rising to his feet, he took only a moment to dust himself off, to wipe the blood from his palms. A dry cough cleared the dirt from his throat and lungs, and he began his run again. We must keep going. An hour later, William stumbled into Barrow's End. He looked more like a beggar or vagabond than the moderately attractive farmer's son he was on days better than this. Sand caked his curly brown mop of hair, causing it to clump. His narrow face looked haggard, and lines of dirt cut across his forehead and around his brown eyes where he'd been squinting against the blazing sunlight, creating the illusion of age at least 20 years beyond his own. His appearance in no way benefited from his rather loose-fitting clothes, which his father had reassured him he would grow into, but he never did. He never gained the solid musculature he'd been told the rigors of farm life would give him, nor did he grow to his father's height the way he'd been promised. As a result, rather than standing handsomely before the goodly folk of the village, tall and well-built and comfortably fitting shirt and pants, he looked old and undernourished, the thinness of his dirty body exaggerated by the bagginess of his pants and tunic. As exhausted as he was, he looked like a hungry and road-weary vagrant, stumbling from starvation, who had probably stolen his outfit from an unsuspecting clothesline. He saw Sarah from across the village square, and hobbled one sore foot meekly in front of the next toward her. She made her way home from Jonathan Butcher's, carrying a parcel which William assumed concealed meat of some kind for the evening's dinner. He called out to her, but his mouth was too dry, his words too garbled. His cries alerted her, but she did not recognize him for his ghastly appearance. Seeing the dirt and blood, Sarah mistook him for a leper and ran back into the butcher's for a broom. William thus felt no surprise when Sarah Miller chased him away on instinct. The tired boy raised his arms in protest, but was too weak to fend off her blows. By the time she realized her mistake, William had already fallen to the ground in an exhausted and battered heap. Sarah could make out only one intelligible word before he slipped into unconsciousness, one word which sent her running for the town elders, leaving William alone in the grass. Disoriented, William awoke in a dimly lit room. The world blurred around the edges, and he could hear voices whispering at him from all directions. His mind leapt to a flurry of fearful ideas. Perhaps he'd been captured by bandits. Or worse, them. He moved to run, but unseen hands restrained him. Captured indeed, he had to fight free, if only he could muster the strength. His body flailed against his captors, but he was too weak to make good his escape. "Curse you all!" he cried out. He could make out a hand coming down to his face, so they would try to silence him, eh? That meant help must be close by. He screamed out a warning to anyone within earshot who might be friendly to his plight. "They're here! They have me! Come save me!" "You're safe, William Overhill. Be still," came a familiar voice. "Now tell us who is here." William squinted through the darkness. Slowly his eyes came into focus, adjusting to the low light. Sarah stood over him, her hand gently brushing against his cheek. She held a damp cloth, which she wiped across his face, cleaning the dirt from his wounds. A slow look around the room told him that he lay on the great table in the town hall. The village elders and a few other prominent townsfolk looked on anxiously. "Good. You're awake. Now, tell us what this business is with kobolds." And that's where we'll stop for now, because you need to get to bed. Have a good nap so you can have energy for the rest of the afternoon. All right. Sleep. I'll see you whenever you wake up. We'll read more later. Bye.